welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I am going to be doing a little video talking about Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky is one of my favorite authors, and I have been requested several times by multiple people to make a video kind of introducing Dostoevsky, talking about where is the best place to start with Dostoevsky and all that kind of stuff. So I want to preface this video by saying that I am by no means an expert. I did not study Russian literature in college or anything like that. So as I am giving you, what to expect and maybe some tips to help you out, this is not coming from a place of expertise, but it's coming from a regular reader. So I do read a lot of classics, and I think a lot of people know that, but I'm not like an expert. I haven't studied these things in depth. So I want to encourage you that if you are just like a regular reader who enjoys reading for fun, but also likes to deeply engage with works of literature, Dostoevsky is not out of your reach. So while I'm not an expert, I have read a lot of Dostoevsky's works. I've read most of his major works, and then a good smattering of his short stories and novellas as well. So I am coming to you with a lot of experience having read Dostoevsky, and I hope that some of the things that I wish I had known when I was starting or things that have helped me will also help you. So I think one of the first questions that people ask me often is, why is Dostoevsky important? Why should I read Dostoevsky? I picked Dostoevsky up on a whim probably like 6 years or so ago when I was at the library and I saw Crime and Punishment sitting there, and I was like, I think I've heard of this before. I'm just gonna give it a try, knowing absolutely nothing about it. It was my first foray into Russian literature, and I was hooked. I've read a lot of other Russian classic greats, so to speak, over the years, and while I have enjoyed all of them, Dostoevsky still remains head and shoulders above the rest for me. So why is that? Because he's so complex. I love that about him. I think that his writing and his characterization has a complexity that I don't often see in a lot of other Russian classics. Again, though I've really loved them, I think that he has a complexity of his prose, of his characters. He explores a lot of the same ideas that other Russian authors do, which is another reason why I think it's really important to read Dostoevsky, particularly if you've enjoyed any other Russian literature at all, is because a lot of Russian literature speaks to each other. A lot of books in classic Russian literature were written in response to other works of literature. And I find that utterly fascinating that there are books that Dostoevsky wrote that were in response to Turgenev's books. And so it's really fun to see how they're all talking to each other, and you get a broader picture of the issues of the day, of the philosophies of the day, and what people were talking about at the time. I think that Dostoevsky also has such a depth to the way that he explores the human psyche and human nature. And I think that that is really, really important. I feel like his books are really steeped in psychology and like examining morality, why people do what they do. So there's a lot of philosophizing, which you find in most works of Russian literature, I think. But Dostoevsky goes a step deeper, I think, in the way that he examines human nature and human psychology. In addition to this, I think that Dostoevsky is considered a pioneer of what's called a polyphonic novel. And that just means that the novel has multiple voices throughout that have very distinct characteristics and beliefs and opinions that are different from the author himself. So it was very rare to find this at the time that Dostoevsky was writing. I think he was one of, maybe the very first, but one of the first to popularize this, to have such well fleshed out characters that are so clearly expressing opinions and characteristics, that we have not a multi-POV novel in the sense that we have first person narratives from each of these people, but we actually have novels written with a third person omniscient narrator, but you feel so in the head of the protagonist or the point of view that you're currently following. And that was something that was really unique in his time. So what can you expect when you dive into a Dostoevsky novel? Is he more difficult than other Russian literature? Is he difficult in general? I would say that his writing is more complex than a lot of other Russian authors I've read. I feel like a lot of Tolstoy's works are more accessible sometimes than Dostoevsky. So I think that it takes a little bit of patience, but it really helps if you know what to expect when you're going in. So what can you expect? You can expect morality, philosophy, and psychology to kind of be at the forefront of these novels. Dostoevsky himself was Eastern Orthodox, so you see a lot of religion intermixed in there, specifically Eastern Orthodox way of thinking, and a lot of the psychological issues and of the day were talked about, like nihilism. But then in addition to that, you have a lot of like societal things being discussed as well, like socialism. Again, these are things that he's discussing with other authors of the day. So there's works that have been written that then someone wrote in response to that, and then Dostoevsky wrote then in response to that. And it's just really fun to kind of see the train of thought and how they're talking to each other. Dostoevsky also has kind of a range of how he's written, because he was a writer and an activist before a lot of his really, really popular and well-known works. He actually was publishing things that were going against what the government wanted, so he was arrested and put in front of a firing squad and actually survived, and then was sent to a Siberian work camp. And that whole experience really changed Dostoevsky's belief systems. I think that's where faith then becomes a much more prominent part of his later works in his life, because that really influenced him in his faith, as well as going through the hardships of a Siberian work camp really influenced how he saw the world as well. So you do see, I think, a stark difference between his earlier works and his later works, not only in writing style, but also in kind of the way that he writes about the issues of the day, because his life experience had greatly changed. I think it can be helpful to know some things about Dostoevsky before you go in, things about his life like what I just mentioned. And also, you know, don't be afraid of rabbit trails into different issues of the day, like I was talking about nihilism, socialism, or even exploring some Eastern Orthodox beliefs and things like that. That can be really helpful in understanding where he's coming from and where he's going. I don't think it's a necessity, because a lot of works that you're going to read by him will have footnotes and will have explanations of things. And that is something that is so amazing about modern literature. When you have like Penguin Classics or Oxford World Classics, books like that, they all have footnotes where they explain things that might not be inherent knowledge to those of us who live in a modern Western culture. I think another thing that you can expect from Dostoevsky is he follows a similar structure in all of his major novels. And I think people can get a little bit muddled in there, because we usually start with some sort of hook or drama that like really, really, really gets you, where you're like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And it's kind of crazy. And then once you hit the middle of the novel, you kind of hit a bit more of the philosophizing and people kind of exploring like, well, why is this happening? Why do I feel this way? Because we have very deeply nuanced characters in these books, in the sense that you have people who are doing bad things, but they're not all bad. And you have people who are doing good things, but they're not all good. These people are not cardboard cutouts or stereotypes. They're very, very deep. And so they often go through these crises of morality or philosophy. And so there's a lot of discussion about those things in the middle of the book. And then once we reach the end of the book, there's enlightenment for the characters and they understand things. And you as a reader also understand things, and you understand, oh, this was where he was going, and the payoff is amazing. But a lot of people get lost in that middle section where there's kind of a seeking happening or a lot of conversations happening that almost seem like, okay, but can we get back to the drama? Because that was really interesting. So I think it's really helpful to know that going in, so you can kind of stick with those sections that might be a little bit more difficult, because I do think that Dostoevsky demands more of you as a reader than a lot of other classic authors that I've read. But I also think that his payoff is better than a lot of classic authors that I've read. So what are some things that can help you if you're having a hard time or you want to tackle Dostoevsky and you feel really intimidated by it? So Russian literature is known for being a little bit confusing to those of us who are not Russian, because the characters have multiple names. Not only do they have names and nicknames, but they have different last names at times, depending on what family name they're going with, because they have multiple family names in Russia. So keeping a list of characters is so helpful, or finding a list of characters, but it can be a little bit tricky to Google that, because you might end up with spoilers of someone who gets married to someone else or someone who dies or something like that that you don't really want to know. So if you have a classic book that has a list of character names in the beginning, That is super helpful because I've found that most of the time those lists in the beginning don't usually have spoilers, but you can also keep lists yourself and it helps you to see like who's related to who and all of those kinds of things. So that kind of helps you keep your bearing. Another thing that's really helpful is immersion reading. So sometimes you can read a book and read a paragraph like 3 times and you're like, what the heck did I just read? And I think that if you're listening to an audiobook, you have that auditory input while you have a visual input of reading on the page. I think it helps it to sink in a little bit better. I would also highly recommend reading with a group or at least a friend, because I think that that helps keep you accountable during those difficult sections of the book and also gives you someone to talk about. So when there's philosophizing happening, you can talk to the people you're reading and being like, oh, well, what do you think of this conversation? And then you're also having conversations, which makes it a lot more interesting, I think. And I think that when you're reading with a group or a friend, a lot of times you'll pick a pace of how you're going to read. I'm going to read so many chapters per day or so many chapters per week. And I think that having a schedule also helps keep you accountable and helps keep you going, and it doesn't feel as overwhelming. If you have been wanting to read a Dostoevsky and not yet taken the plunge, I am actually hosting a casual read along of Crime and Punishment on my Discord in September. So you can hop in and join us. There's a whole bunch of us. I think there's at least 6 of us that want to be reading this book together. So if you are like, oh, I don't know, I really want to give it a try, but I don't know, hop on Discord and read Crime and Punishment with us. Another thing that can help if you feel like you're getting a little bit bogged down is if you go online, there are chapter summaries of every chapter of Dostoevsky's books. And that can be really helpful to kind of like reinforce if you're like, oh, that's actually that person. I thought it was someone else. Like, it can help you get your footing, particularly in the beginning. Another thing that can really help you, this is a very big resource to recommend to you, but Joseph Frank has written an amazing biography of Dostoevsky. Believe it or not, this is actually abridged. I think the full biography is like multiple volumes. I want to say like 5 or 6 volumes. I can't remember exactly. So I have the abridged version and it is like 1,000 pages. So it's kind of funny. I'm not telling you need to go read this entire thing. You could if you wanted to, but there are chapters devoted to certain works of Dostoevsky, what was going on in his life, what was his thought process as he was writing this, and it kind of can help with the interpretation of the work that you're currently reading. Lastly, I just want to say to you, translation matters. This is a Russian work of literature, and as such, it was written in the Russian language. Go figure. So you are reading a translation in English, and there are a wide variety of translations that you could choose. I could tell you, hey, this is the best translation, but I don't think that that is true because I think that different translations work better for different people. One of my favorite translators is Constance Garnett. I think that her translations kind of read similarly to Victorian classics, so I kind of like that feel. Another really popular translator duo is Pavir and Volokonsky. They have done all the vintage classics, so if you see the vintage classic brand, it's going to be Pavir and Volokonsky. Their translations are more modern, so that can actually be really, really helpful if you don't read as much classic literature or if you are new to Russian literature. Some people don't like their translations because they feel like they're a little clunky and they don't really like their phrasing, but I think it's really, really helpful because it's a bit more straightforward. So that is a really nice aspect of their translation. There are a plethora of other translators. Some publishers like Penguin might have the same translator for like all of Dostoevsky's work, but that's not necessarily typical. They may have different translators for different ones of Dostoevsky's works. So what I would recommend to you is if you are in like a bookstore or a library, or if you can get like a sample of the book online, read a couple of paragraphs from the beginning of the book in different translations and see which one kind of clicks more with you. Which one do you enjoy reading the most? Which one is more understandable for you? Which one sucks you in more? Because it is complex and it is helpful if you have a translation that doesn't also feel complex. It will make the story, it will make the ideas so much more accessible to you if the translation itself is not a hurdle. Okay, lastly, what is a good place to start with Dostoevsky? I have a couple of different recommendations to you. So I have to start with my number one recommendation. This is where I usually tell people to start because I love it and it's where I started and it's still my favorite Dostoevsky work, and that's Crime and Punishment. Crime and Punishment is a really fascinating study of a man called Raskolnikov who is a student, and he ends up murdering someone very early on in the book. So this is not your typical whodunit because you know who did it. It's an exploration of what he's thinking as he's trying to justify, also wrestling with guilt. So it's not like a whodunit, it's why did he do it? And I think that this is such an incredible piece of literature. It's actually one of my favorite books of all time, which is part of the reason that I am rereading it for the third time next month. I'm also going to recommend another one of Dostoevsky's major works that I actually haven't read yet. This is one of the only ones of his that I haven't read yet. And that's The House of the Dead, or it may be titled Notes from a Dead House. This is a fictionalized account of Dostoevsky's time in Siberia. So he based some of the characters and conversations and things in this book on his time in Siberia, and people that I've talked to who have read this so that they think it's an excellent place to start with Dostoevsky because you kind of get some of the background of what he went through and some of his mentality in his later works, because this is exploring what he went through at that time. And last but not least, if these works are intimidating to you because they're a bit longer, although Notes from a Dead House is not very long, and Crime and Punishment I think is around 500 pages, so it's not as long as like Demons or Brothers Karamazov or something like that. But if you want a little bite-sized chunk of what Dostoevsky has to offer, I would recommend dipping your toes into some of his short stories or novellas. I think that a lot of them don't explore psychology or philosophy quite as deeply. You get a little taste of that, but you also get a taste of his writing. So one of my favorite collections of short stories of his is A Bad Business. This is a newer collection of short stories, not that the short stories themselves are new, but it's a newer translation and a newer compilation. So this has 6 of his short stories in there, A Bad Business being the title story. And I think that this actually gives a really nice like smattering of what Dostoevsky brings to the table, in terms that we have short stories that are hilarious and so fun, but then we also have some like really heartrending short stories in here as well. One in particular that feels almost Dickensian in the way that it is written. This is a really great short story collection to start with, so I would highly recommend this. I think that the translation is really accessible as well, but if you're not driving with the translation, you can find a lot of these short stories online for free in different translations if you want to give them a try. Well, I hope that this video has been helpful to you if you're someone who has wanted to try Dostoevsky for a while and you feel kind of intimidated by it. If you are a lover of Dostoevsky, I would love if you would also put any tips that you think would be helpful in the comments below to help other people who find this video. I've done a couple other videos of this sort. I've done one for War and Peace and one for Dickens, so if those are other works you wanted to try but you felt intimidated by, I hope you'll check out those videos. I'll have them linked in the description of this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.